Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Book Brood, and we're here tonight to bring you our February wrap-up. So, you kicked ass this month, so you have about twice as much stuff read
I
than
was
I
getting
do.
excited until I went through and I saw how many were graphic novels, and how many were short stories, and how many were poetry collections, so... But a lot. Yeah, I read a lot, comparatively to last month, so... Okay, so should I just start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My book club chose Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. This is not my usual thing.
Not your usual bag.
At all.
Hold that
if you'd like to hold that, that's fine. So this is almost 500 pages, and I have this thing with a lot of mystery thrillers where I think you could at least cut them in half and it would be completely fine. I feel like there's so much filler in most of these.
You gotta stretch out that tension.
No, no, you don't.
You don't need one more red herring?
No, I'm not a big thriller fan, and this one wasn't really even thrilling. But this follows a group of mothers whose children are all in the same kindergarten class. And you see their daily lives, their daily struggles, their fighting, their like competition, their mommy competitions with each other, you know, and their like relationships with their older kids or their exes, or their so much just daily family drama, daily life drama. There was a few good points in here where they were like trying to say, you know, how much of your self-worth, like as a mother myself, I got a few things out of this, like how much of your self-worth is derived from your children's success or your spouse's success, or like how well your family is perceived by the community, right? And that kind of stuff. But altogether, I thought it was way too long. I was not a huge fan. I did think that the way this story was told worked out, because at the very beginning you find out someone was murdered and somebody did it, but you don't know who, and it's told in interviews and then also just like day-to-day narrative or whatever. But honestly, it could have been 150 pages and it would have been the same exact story, so I don't know. So that's my thoughts and opinions on that. I am gonna watch the show though. I hear the show is good. Okay, I don't have this one. I got it from the library, but it's a graphic novel. It's Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too. It's spelled differently. There's random letters thrown in and random spelling errors. It's like this cutesy little alien character who comes to Earth and interacts with all the life that it finds, trees and animals and stuff, and it's broken down into these tiny little sections of like life lessons. And so like, you know, the tree is stuck right there, right? And so the alien learns to like just accept life as it is, like just slow down and chill, you know, like when the leaves fall off, like let things go. And like when the beaver is running around collecting sticks and trying to build his dam and hurrying, and it's just, you know, like these over the top life lessons of like, I mean, it's cute,
Yeah.
but
It doesn't give you much as an adult.
yeah, that was okay. Not great. Oh, that was by Jomny Sun. That was Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too.
Interesting.
Yes.
All right. The first thing I read in February is Girls of Riyadh. This is by Raja Al-Sinani. I'm sorry if I butchered that, but this was originally was a emails sent to a subscriber list in Saudi Arabia.
What?
And that's how this began, is really just sort of a sort of blog format.
Okay.
By this author, and each chapter is led in by sort of a personal story of her, of writing these, you know, week to week or however often she did them. and the effect it had on society, the effect it was having on her life, people, chiming in on it.
Sure.
But this is a story that follows 4 young adult Saudi Arabian women, Gamra, Michelle, Sadim, and Lamis. And it is a story just about their lives as young adult women in upper class Saudi Arabian culture. And as a very liberal-minded Westerner, this had some very difficult things to read in it. Examples could be, there could be a lot negative said about hookup culture of Western civilization or whatever, but apparently there's also a hookup culture here where men propose marriage, sign marriage contracts, convince the woman to then sleep with them, and then cancel everything because they're just not feeling it. That has little implications for the man. For the woman, though, at that point, that has huge implications for any relationship she wants to have in the future. So that was kind of one of the first things that happened to one of the women in here, and it's almost kind of a theme for this book overall. And as it progresses through, it tries to illustrate growth of each of the women. I'd say, except for Lamis, she was kind of the forgotten character in this book, that I really don't remember much of what happened with her, other than the fact that she probably had the most, by cultural standards, normal life as
our culture or her culture?
Her culture.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was really just, her parents
chose her husband.
Her husband's parents chose her, and they decided for them, and they just went along with it and were mostly okay with it. My best friend is married. His wife is a Saudi national, and I was trying to talk with her more about just like if she knew about when these were just emails going around and sort of like what the buzz was like, but she knew about the book, but wasn't in on just following them.
Okay, the next 2 things I read are Fence Volume 1 and 2, and these are by C.S. Picat. She wrote the Captive Prince trilogy. These are illustrated by Johanna the Mad. That's the name that...
That's a nice pen name.
I know, right? That's pretty good. So these are about mostly following 2 boys, Nicholas and Saiji, and they're in a boarding school. They learn other things, but mostly like they're on the fencing team, and they're one of them, Saiji, is ranked number 2 in the nation and is super pissed that he lost the number 1 spot to this one dude, and Nicholas is just an up-and-coming, like, he's this poor kid who, like, is on scholarship and just trying to break into the whole world of fencing or whatever, and of course, they have to be roommates and they hate each other and blah, blah, blah. And they're going to fall in love because that's just C.S. Picat. Like, that's going to happen. But I am really enjoying these because I was surprised how much just about fencing technique and rules and just the whole world of fencing that they are able to squeeze in here.
That's what I love about sports comic books, is you really get to know a lot about the sport itself. It was really kind of fun.
Yeah, it's cool. I thought I'd just show some pictures real quick. Oh yeah, see? Oh, you're my roommate? Ah! Yeah. No, these are good, and I would love to continue on in the series if they ever come back out with the next one. I think the next one comes out in the summer. And then the next one I read is A Destiny of Dragons by T.J. Klune, and this is the follow-up to A Lightning Struck Heart, or The Lightning Struck Heart. The really funny one that I read last month about Sam, the Magician's Apprentice and Night Delicious Face and Gary the gay hornless unicorn and their adventures. And yes, this one unfortunately was a little bit of a downer for me, and I think that's just because like the author is taking the story a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what T.J. Klune was saying was that A Lightning Struck Heart was like an introduction to the world and characters, and then the next 3 are like a trilogy.
Yeah.
There's a giant story arc with a big bad guy, and there's the one long adventure, and it's a lot more serious. There's still jokes and everything everywhere, but I don't know. It was...
The magic wasn't quite there.
Yeah, a lot of the first one, the fun of it was like 2 characters you know are gonna get together.
Mm-hmm.
But like they don't get together until the end, so all of their interactions and they're like tripping over each other, like just like acting like total, you know, just goofballs and like just embarrassing, like really cringeworthy, like just adorableness. And now they're together, so you don't have that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just adventure basically.
Yeah. That's a little too bad.
And it's the same narrator. I listened to these on audiobook.
That's right, you mentioned that.
But the narrator for this one, like, just got way too into it or something. Yeah, he was doing this weird, like, snuffle thing. Like, so one of the characters is a unicorn, so he snuffles like a horse, right? Like, or whatever. But the narrator kept doing that for everyone. Like, it started out just the unicorn, but then all of a sudden it was like every other character was doing it in like a weird, like, I don't know.
Now, do you think if you read the text, it would have come off that way?
I don't think so. There were a lot of random jokes where, you know, someone says something clever and they're like, you know, waiting for, like, enjoying the punchline, like, hey, or whatever. And in those moments, that's when he would do the little snuffle thing. Like,
okay.
I don't.
So it's people laughing at their own jokes like I do all the time.
Kind of, but in a really annoying kind of, like, hoarse way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, anyways. I don't think I'm going to be continuing on in the series.
Oh, that's too bad. The next thing I read in February was Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is one that's been on my shelf for a long time because Octavia Butler is well known for just being a very prominent, sort of the face of female, black female sci-fi. Mm-hmm. So this is probably her most well-known book, and for a good reason too. This is a very fascinating circumstance of Dana, a middle-aged black woman in the 70s who's married to Kevin, who's a white man. But she begins to become displaced in time back to a white ancestor she had who is a distant relative from the slavery era. And so she ends up back in slave times. And when I was first described the synopsis to this, it felt like she just went back and that was it, but she actually floats back and forth quite a bit, and it's tied specifically to when she first goes back to this young boy, who she becomes quite fast friends with, and he, as a child, just doesn't quite understand, you know, institutional slavery and racism, things like that.
Yeah.
It's just the world he lives in, but as things progress, she, you know, it's just minutes or days for her, but it's years in the past that she keeps floating back and forth. And as this relative of hers ages up, he's just more and more a man of his time, unfortunately. Yeah. And this really highlights the powerlessness of slavery that you just don't realize until it's put into the perspective of someone from a modern era being forced into that world and having to behave that way and be treated that way is just paints it in such a clear light.
Yeah.
This is very, very captivating book.
Okay. The next things that I read were volumes 3 and 4 of I Hate Fairyland. I had to reread volume 3 because I couldn't remember what happened, and then I read volume 4. And these are really fun and super gruesome, and these are by Scotty Young, apparently writer and artist, Scotty Young. And I think this entire series really went downhill from the first one. I think that the first issue was the best, but then trying to stretch it out into like an arc, into a story, like a complete story, was a bit tricky. I think I recommend it, all 4 issues. I mean, it's not very long, it's only 4. It's good. I don't think the ending was great, but it was worth reading, I think. It's so funny because our kids love these. And they're so brutal, and it's one of those things where you're like, how much do I censor, and how much do I just let them enjoy it? But that's that. And the next thing I read was Inside Darkness by Hudson Lin. And this was just a random thing I picked up at the library, but I'm really glad I read it. This follows 2 characters, Cameron and Tyler. Cameron is a refugee worker, aid worker. I don't remember, in Africa somewhere. And then Tyler is a journalist. And they briefly meet there where Cameron's been working for like a decade. Cameron's got serious PTSD and he's got serious issues. And he knows this, and so he's getting out of the line of work. He's coming back to New York, where Tyler lives. But even when he comes home, like his PTSD and all of his anxiety and depression and all of this trauma from all the traumatic things he's seen over the last 10 years of like people getting killed very brutally, and things like that, or just catch up to him, and he completely spirals out of control. And Cameron and Tyler are like kind of on again, off again, like having a little bit of a relationship, but Cameron's spiraling out of control, and Tyler's like, dude, I've got my own problems, I care about you, but I can't let you pull me down into whatever this is. If you're not going to get the help you obviously need, there's not a lot I can do. I thought this was a really mature way of handling that sort of a situation. I think that the PTSD and anxiety and depression felt really real. I thought that was well handled for that character. And then Tyler is Chinese American, and he's dealing with this just casual racism or like stereotyping in the journalist community, where he keeps trying to get a raise in a different position, but they're keeping him mostly working Chinatown and stuff just because he looks like he, fits.
Yeah.
And he keeps saying, he's like, I don't speak Mandarin. I'm American. I'm full American. I was born here. I live here. Like, I only speak English. And they just refuse to, promote him and stuff like that. And anyways, I thought that was pretty cool. I had not read about a character, in a long time dealing with just casual racism like that.
The next thing I read in February was Freshwater by Awaki Emezi. This is a debut novel by her, and let me tell you, this lady has a way with words. The overall just narrative of this story, it keeps you fascinated and guessing sort of throughout, or at least for me. This has to do with the character Diada, who is a Nigerian national, and this has to do, the way the book explains it is that she has these river gods living inside her, and they can take over her personality and essentially drive her body, to do what they wish. And it's fascinating because the struggles that Diada goes through as her life progresses, and the way these gods react to them and adapt to try and help her, is what they think in her life, is a lot of very just what you would assume would be psychological reactions to events of trauma and just growing up. This book has a trigger warning for just like everything in the book. It's has very heavy subject matter. At one point, she describes about how these gods were born inside of her, and it becomes clear that one of the most predominant ones inside of her, was born when she was raped for the first time, by her boyfriend, who was her long-term boyfriend, and so this god, or part of her personality, would take over in her mind anytime anything sexual would happen to her.
Yeah.
And so from Diada's perspective, these men are doing nothing wrong to her because this one side of her is taking all of that pain, essentially.
So she has no
Right.
recollection or memory
Right, and
of
so
it.
throughout this book, you're wondering, is this a sci-fi story of someone with gods living in their head, or is this someone struggling with DID, dissociative identity disorder, and just, the effects that trauma has on people.
Wow.
This book just fascinated me throughout in reading it. It was incredible.
You were describing that while you were reading it to me. And so when I went to the library to pick up a physical copy of it, I was shocked. I found that in the young adult section.
Really?
Yeah, it was on this display along with like Nnedi Okorafor and a bunch of stuff like that. But it was in the young adult section.
Wow.
So like a lot of Nnedi Okorafor stuff is not YA either. I don't know what was going on, but yeah, I think that one is a lot of people expect that to be on the women's prize list.
Yeah.
That's coming up. Yeah. A lot of people are talking about it.
Oh, this one? Or
Freshwater.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because this was written last year, so...
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so
Well, I know that I was listening to
published
Simon
Mm-hmm.
from Savage Reads, and he mentioned that one.
Oh, okay.
So, yep. Okay, the next thing that I read was The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. This is a bind-up of a whole bunch of stories, but I just read The Lottery just because it's a classic, and and nobody will tell you what it's about, basically. And they're like, no, just go read it for yourself. It's only, 10 pages or whatever. It was good. I see why people use it as an example of good writing, because it has this feeling of like eerie foreboding just growing. Like there's nothing really that abnormal happening, but just through the writing you just get this weird feeling like, oh no, something's gonna happen, and I thought the tension was well done. And then the next thing I read was Poisoned Apples, Poems for You, My Pretty, by Kristen Hepperman. And I just randomly picked this up at the library. It is a story of just short little poems that are very feminist, but each of them take on like a little bit of a fairy tale, like a trope or a problematic thing about how a woman in a fairy tale was treated, just like a little aspect of it. and then just turns it into just, you know, a feminist poem.
Okay.
And, you know, I thought it was really good. I enjoyed most of the poems, and it was an interesting mix of modern day ideas and fairy tale folklore.
Yeah.
Like,
Cool.
there's one where she talks about, like, the inside of an Abercrombie store or something like that, but then also blends in, like, Snow White into it.
Okay.
And it's a short poem. It's, you know, so it was, I thought it was, I'm not a poetry expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought it was entertaining. So.
The next thing I read was Everything Here is Beautiful by Mira T. Lee. This is a story about a Chinese immigrant family, but it's a mother and two daughters. The oldest daughter was born when the mother emigrated from China to the United States, and she was pregnant with the youngest. This is a story about the two daughters, Miranda, the oldest, and Lucille, the youngest, and their relationship as adults from pretty much the point of when their mother's health began to decline from cancer to just to later in life, I guess. This is what I have to say without spoilers. And the relationship they have and the implications of mental illness on a family and those around the person suffering from the illness. And so much of it this provides great perspective because it's not just Miranda and Lucille that you follow as perspective characters. You also follow two of the boyfriends of Lucille, who Lucille is the one that has it's either borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia, something in between. The doctors never figure it out, but she struggles with it always. And so to see it from her sister's point of view, from her point of view, from her boyfriend's and husband at one time's point of view, and to see how the illness affects everyone and how the illness affecting people, the person suffering from the illness, how it affects the people around them, but then how that reflects back onto the person suffering with the disorder themselves. In that Lucille felt like in some time she just straight tells her sisters, like, I'm nothing but a disease to you. Can you just be my sister? And it's just very reflective, you have to say, and very painful too. This obviously this one hurt through some times, but beautiful story.
Wow.
Very touching.
You read a lot of different books this month. I'm quite impressed. It's not your usual cup of tea at all.
I needed some different stuff.
Good. The next thing I read was Hide by Matthew Griffin. This one took me a while to finish. I think I started it in January. Not because it's long, but just because it's slow. I'm out of breath. I ran up the stairs. Okay. Not that it's long, but it's a slower story. It's a story about two people who've spent the last 60 years together, and so it bounces back and forth between when they met, when they were in their early 20s, and then still out of breath, and then when they're in their late 80s and one of them is suffering from intense health issues. But this is a story about Frank and Wendell, and they meet at the end of World War II when Frank comes back from the war. And in the time that they're together, in the time and place, two men can't be together. And it's not just unacceptable socially, but it's dangerous. Like, people get killed or people get arrested if it's found out that they're in a relationship like that. So hide, basically.
Yeah.
They cut themselves off from their family, their friends, they move out into the woods, and they're never seen in the same place at the same time. They don't grocery shop together. They don't go to the movies together. They never carpool. And it's interesting because the way that it's written, you're learning about how they got together, and then you're seeing, like, how isolated they became, and you're trying to figure out, like, it's definitely a check your privilege sort of situation where you're like, why would you be this far removed? Why would it be this difficult for you? Like, yeah, it's going to be difficult, but, like, how much of your problems are because you've completely isolated yourself? And then you get to the point where they're talking about how many people in their community were arrested, or their names were published in the paper, and so they lost their jobs and their families and things like that. And that's the reason, obviously, that they didn't want each other to get hurt, so they were so careful. But it's really heartbreaking that, in the present time in this story, one of them is is dying, basically, wasting away physically and mentally, and they're realizing that nobody else knows that they've spent the last 60 years together. They've never had children. Their families don't know about each other. They don't have photographs of them on vacation together. They have nothing physical to show for the last 60 years. Yeah, but basically the whole story is, like, at the end, like, was it worth it for you? Basically, like, oh my god. I know.
Gonna make me tear up.
I know. The feelings and the sentiment behind this story, I really enjoyed. The execution was a little bit lacking for me, but I liked the ideas behind it, and so yes.
The next thing I read in February was Captive by A.D. Robertson. This is a romance novel.
No. This right here?
So I was actually very impressed by this. When I was reading through this initially, I was impressed by the fact of the amount of world building and character establishment that was happening in the beginning of this book.
Yes.
And the way that it deferred the steaminess to great effectiveness.
You can no longer make fun of me for being so into these romance stories. They're addicting.
I got to admit, I got way more into this than I I needed to. But what I found out about this when I was trying to locate its sequels online, or where to find them, which if you know where to find this, please find me in the comments and let me know, because I
don't think it was ever published.
Probably, yeah.
It says it was published, but we couldn't find it.
Yeah, but a reason this was so well developed, I think, is I found out that this is a erotic spin-off of a YA series that A.D. Robertson was not the pseudonym used from the for the young adult series, I think, for appropriate reasons.
Right.
But so I thought that was fun, finding that out, that this author allowed herself to go and
it's like she wrote
have
fan
fun
fiction
with
for
her own story.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So, did I need to go into the plot at this at all?
What was the YA series that it was?
It was the Nightshade series. I can't remember what the author's actual name is.
Okay.
We'll put it right here. Don't laugh at me.
No. I'm laughing at the fact that, like, That's awesome that an author would totally go fan fiction
Right,
on their
I
own
know.
stuff. That's awesome. Okay, I don't remember if I mentioned this in my last wrap up, but over the last few weeks I went, well, a few weeks as in like 5 weeks, I went a little crazy on the whole Romeo and Juliet thing. I have read so many children's books to the kids. I've forced the whole family to watch 2 adaptations, 3? 2
Two,
adaptations of Romeo and Juliet. We have a choose your own adventure story happening. We've listened to some music from Romeo and Juliet. I went insane. And then I realized that it's been over a decade since I read the original.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing I read was the original Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare. And hopefully I've finally gotten it out of my system. Hopefully.
I'm impressed, though. Both of us are really not Shakespeare people.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
at all.
and I props to you for...
I just got a bug or a bee in my bonnet or whatever that expression is. Like, it's just stuck in there and I needed to explore it.
You know, the last time I went to something Shakespeare, I think I was 18 years old and I went to the Tempest, you know, with some college production or something like that. I remember I enjoyed it, but I still just I could not follow the Shakespearean poetry, and so it was nice to come back to that because it was much easier this time. And I don't know if Romeo and Juliet's easier on, you know,
right,
on the pleb's brain,
right,
you know, like mine, but
no, I agree. I found this a lot easier too. And then also watching 2 movie adaptations of it first, watching the actors while they were, you know, acting out the story was very helpful. Instead of just reading it on the page.
Exactly,
like,
yes. You get
Romeo says this,
the
Julia.
body language,
Juliet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Julia. I keep saying Julia.
Julia.
For some reason, I don't know why. Anyways.
All right, the last thing I read in February is The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. This is an absolutely adorable story that is just cute as heck. It is a story about Alexa and Drew, who get stuck in an elevator together for about 15 minutes, and Drew has to attend the next day the wedding of his ex-girlfriend to one of his best friends, and he doesn't have a date, and so, you know, circumstances, he just by chance asks Alexa to go with him, and it then takes them on an adventure of, you know, of romance, of dating, and what is this? We live in different cities, you know, a plane ride apart, we can't, you know, but they both really like each other, and the balance of this that goes back and forth between the 2 perspective characters, which is Drew and Alexa, even though this is a third-person story, third-person point of view, I think it was written really well. You get inside both of their heads, and their emotions and feelings really imprint on you throughout this story. There is a bit of a stretch at the end for the conflict, but I mean it's forgivable for a cute story. You know, it has to. You gotta have something in there.
Right.
You know? And,
Yeah.
so I think I'm gonna buy this one because I'm definitely gonna read this again just for the
so
cuteness.
I love that you read so much romance, and I think that's lovely.
Oh well, I'm glad you're happy with.
Just because I nerd out on romance too much, probably. Okay, the last thing that I read was Educated, a memoir by Tara Westover. And I didn't make any notes because I finished that this morning. This story, this is about Tara, who is raised in the mountains with fundamentalist parents who are preppers and doomsday preppers, and they believe in faith healing, and they believe in a lot of conspiracy theories, And it's hard to talk about this one. I'm really glad I read this because it resonated so much with me personally. I don't want to get into it too much, but I could identify a lot with the struggle that Tara had between, do I stay and try to stay part of the family, even though I don't believe in some of this extremism, or do I leave because there's the family really drew a hard line in the sand, and like, either you follow our rules and let your extremely overbearing father and brothers dictate your entire life, or you get out and you never see anyone in the family again. And she ended up going from not having any education whatsoever while growing up to graduating with a, getting a PhD from Cambridge. She went to Harvard. She traveled the world, and just, no, it was good. I'm glad I read it. Yeah.
You talked about that one a lot when you were reading it.
I did.
Really
It was
hit home with you.
vindicating. I don't know. Yeah, it was good.
And so that was our huge wrap-up, extra long for February. Please let us know in the comments what you thought about what we read, what you read.
Yep.
And we'll see you next time.
Happy reading.